There was a bulldozer on my backyard lawn. A freaking bulldozer. Digging a hole where my vegetable garden used to be. The HOA president smiled, waved from her porch, and said, "Don't worry, your property was rezoned. I handled it myself." And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karen-backed fake HOA plays militia in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame, yep. That's me. The guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. You're probably wondering, how do you even pull that off legally? And how does she not notice? Trust me, those answers are coming. But to understand this entire absurd masterpiece of HOA-fueled chaos, we've got to rewind a bit. Back to the moment I realized my backyard was disappearing and my neighbor had declared herself queen of the cul-de-sac. It all started on a Wednesday. A painfully average, pre-coffee Wednesday. I walked out with my usual mug and saw my backyard had developed what looked like a crater overnight. My tomatoes? Gone. The makeshift greenhouse I'd built last spring? Obliterated. In its place, construction workers in neon vests were operating a backhoe like they were filming an action scene. One of them was eating a donut on top of my compost bin. I stood there in my robe, blinking like an idiot, wondering if I'd sleepwalked into an alternate dimension. Then Cheryl appeared. Cheryl, the HOA president. Cheryl, who had once fined my neighbor $400 because her wind chimes were too whimsical. Cheryl, who ran the HOA like it was a privately owned dictatorship and she was Kim Jong-un with a Pinterest board. She was wearing a floppy sun hat, matching tennis outfit, and what I can only describe as a smug, suburban warlord grin. "Oh hey there!" She chirped like this was normal, like my entire backyard hadn't been turned into a DIY construction zone. "I just wanted to let you know we rezoned the back 10 feet of your property. It's part of the shared community green space now." I just stared at her. "We?" I asked. "The HOA board. I facilitated the paperwork," she said, patting a manila folder on her hip like it was a badge of honor. "It's already been approved. That's why we're starting the pool house today." "The what now?" "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just a pool house. Technically, it's for the whole community. But since I have the largest lot on this side, it made sense to position it here. You'll still have plenty of lawn space left." Now, at this point, most people would probably scream. Maybe grab a shovel and start swinging. But me? I just smiled. Because Cheryl didn't know who she was messing with. She thought I was just the quiet neighbor. The one who never came to HOA meetings. The one who worked some admin job with the city. That's what she told people. That I filed permits or something. What I actually do is sign them. Zoning commissioner. Entire county. Every land use request, permit, and rezoning form goes through me. Which meant, spoiler alert, Cheryl's entire, rezone the property for a pool house stunt. Illegal. Fraudulent. And deeply, hilariously punishable by law. But instead of shutting it down right there, I decided to let her dig. I wanted to see just how deep she'd bury herself before I called in the wrecking ball. That week was, frankly, art. Every day, I'd walk outside with my coffee and watch as Cheryl's ego manifested itself in bricks and foundation work. She barked orders at contractors, posed with blueprints like she was building the Louvre, and even roped in a few HOA cronies to help plant community hedges along what used to be my property line. At one point she told a neighbor, "Oh, I had to pull some strings at the county to get this approved so fast." Perks of being president. Sure, Cheryl. Pulling strings. With a zoning request that never even made it to my office. You didn't just skip the approval, you forged it. And I had the receipt. Literally. She'd copied one of my old emails, pasted it into a fake document, and signed my name in Comic Sans. Comic Sans. That alone should have earned her jail time. But Cheryl wasn't just building illegally. Oh no. She was also draining water illegally. From my private well. You see, I live on the edge of the neighborhood, and my property predates the HOA by a good 15 years, which means I'm not technically under their jurisdiction, and I have my own water access. A well I keep locked and underground. Or so I thought. Turns out, Cheryl had somehow figured out where it was. Had a plumber quietly tap into the line. Used it to fill her kiddie pool and water her begonias. For weeks. Without ever asking. Or paying. Or even understanding that the water wasn't free. How did I find out? I noticed a drop in pressure during my evening shower and installed a pressure gauge. When I saw the dip happen every afternoon at 2 p.m., the exact time Cheryl watered her garden, I followed the line and found the unauthorized junction. Sloppy. Obvious. Illegal. So what did I do? I rerouted the system to flush with greywater, essentially treated sewage. Still legally classified as non-potable. Still technically part of my property. And totally safe, but extremely unpleasant smelling. That afternoon, Cheryl turned on her sprinkler system. 2 minutes later, she was screaming loud enough to alert dogs in 3 counties. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The best part? She didn't even realize I'd done it. She thought the landscaper messed up. Or that the well had gone bad. I filed a report with the city that night about unauthorized plumbing work on private infrastructure and signed it anonymously. By Friday, she had a half-built pool house, a garden that reeked of sewer water, and contractors who were starting to get nervous. And Cheryl? Cheryl still thought she was winning. What she didn't know was that every contractor she'd hired was now working under a shadow of legal violations. That her approval was about to trigger a full audit. That I'd been quietly collecting evidence for the zoning board. That her fake permit was now part of a growing investigation into HOA fraud. But the real twist? As I stood there, watching her wave off another neighbor's concern with that same sugary, condescending voice, I saw something that made me pause. On the blueprints tucked under her arm, clearly labeled in bold Sharpie, was the name of a local architect. Someone I knew. Someone who owed me a favor. And just like that, I realized this wasn't just about the pool house anymore. She was planning something bigger. And it was time to dig a little deeper. Cheryl had started calling it the community oasis. I heard her say it to a group of moms at the park, as if she were unveiling a luxury resort. It's going to have a wet bar, she gushed. A pergola, imported tile, maybe even a stone pizza oven. You know, for HOA events. One of the moms raised an eyebrow and asked how the HOA got the funding. Cheryl just laughed. Oh, it's all been handled through creative budgeting and rezoning. Honestly, it's a miracle we had the space. The space, of course, was my property. Or at least, it had been until Cheryl took it upon herself to declare eminent domain with glitter pens and a fake document. The pool house was rising fast. Too fast. She'd hired a crew that worked like they were on a deadline, probably because she'd promised them it would be approved within the week. There were steel frames going up, concrete being poured, even electrical wiring being installed. I watched it all unfold from my kitchen window like it was a low-budget reality show with excellent set destruction and terrible script writing. I played dumb. That was the key. I acted confused, concerned, maybe a little annoyed, but never angry. To Cheryl, I was just the harmless neighbor. The guy who couldn't quite figure out how the HOA worked. She even had the audacity to offer me a membership discount once the pool was complete. Said I'd get limited guest access if I played nice. Meanwhile, I was already 10 steps ahead, building the most damning paper trail this neighborhood had ever seen. The first piece was easy. Satellite imagery. I pulled public records and overlaid them with current aerial footage of my property. The boundary line was indisputable. Cheryl's precious oasis extended nearly 15 feet into my land. The next step was pulling the plat map, the official property line documentation filed with the county. I already had a copy, but I printed out a fresh one with color-coded markings. Red for her violations, blue for her fake green space. green for the garden she'd nuke. The most delicious part came when I tracked down the permit she claimed to have filed. She even showed it to a neighbor during a block party, waving it around like it was a backstage pass. "See? Stamped and everything," she bragged. Except the stamp was from a permit I'd signed 2 years ago for an elementary school cafeteria expansion. She'd literally scanned it, changed the name in Microsoft Word, and printed it out. I knew because I recognized the date, the spacing, and, God help her, the typo I made that I never corrected. She'd copied that too. I started compiling everything. Photos, screenshots, audio clips. I recorded her admitting to the construction on someone else's property. I took pictures of the well tap, the illegal trench that connected her irrigation to my plumbing, the non-permitted electrical work snaking into her house from an outlet she'd rewired herself. I could have shut it all down right then with one phone call. But no. Cheryl needed to build her dream just high enough to make the fall worthwhile. Then came the tipping point. One morning, she marched over to my porch with a clipboard in one hand and a ridiculous straw smoothie in the other. "You've been flagged," she said, all fake concern and syrupy condescension. "Your mailbox doesn't meet HOA design standards, and your lawn is approximately 1 inch above the approved grass height. We'll need you to fix that by Friday or face a fine." I stared at her. She stared back. Neither of us blinked. I wanted to laugh. My mailbox? My lawn? While her backyard looked like a construction site and my tomatoes were being replaced by a poolside cabana. But I nodded. Said I'd take care of it. And then I filed the formal violation report to the city. Anonymously, of course. The one that triggered the inspection. 3 men in ties and neon safety vests showed up at Cheryl's house the following Wednesday. They didn't knock. They went straight to the backyard with clipboards and tape measures and a very unimpressed look on their faces. Cheryl stormed out in her tennis skirt and tried to charm them. It didn't work. When one of the inspectors pointed out that the concrete poured crossed property lines, she turned bright red and shouted something about emergency community zoning. I watched it all from my kitchen, sipping coffee and pretending not to enjoy myself. One of the inspectors knocked on my door shortly after. He asked if I had any documents related to the property line. I showed him everything. The plat maps, the well documentation, even a photo of Cheryl pointing directly at the blueprints with her hand on the section marked private property, not for construction. The very next day, a bright red "Stop Work" notice was posted on her front window. The workers vanished like smoke. The HOA board had an emergency meeting. And Cheryl? Cheryl had no clue what was coming next. The twist? She still thought she could spin it. Told neighbors the city was just doing a routine review. Said the community oasis was just delayed. Called it bureaucratic nonsense. "They're just jealous of our initiative," she said. But I wasn't done. That night I went digging again. Found the name of the architect she'd hired. A guy I knew from years ago. He owed me a favor from a zoning loophole I'd once helped him navigate during a residential to commercial conversion. I gave him a call. Asked a few harmless questions. He spilled everything. Cheryl had told him the HOA owned all the land around her house. Said she was the legal representative and that she had special zoning authority. He'd never even verified the claim. Just took her word for it. He was horrified. Immediately agreed to send me the original project plans. Every document had Cheryl's signature. And every one was completely, spectacularly illegal. I now had proof of forged permits, false representation, property encroachment, and misuse of HOA funds. But the cherry on top? A budget document that showed Cheryl had already started collecting additional fees from HOA members, labeled Community Improvement Fund. She was charging the neighborhood for a pool house built on land she didn't own with permits she forged. All under the assumption that nobody would challenge her authority. Until now. And just when I thought it couldn't get better, the county clerk's office called me. Apparently, someone had submitted a rezoning request last month for my property, changing it from residential to mixed use. That someone? Cheryl. Using a fake letter from me as approval. I asked for a copy. They faxed it over. There it was. My name, misspelled, with a signature that looked like it had been written by a caffeinated raccoon. The same Comic Sans heading. The same recycled document number. It was practically a confession letter. That's when I knew this wasn't just about my garden. This was about fraud. About power. About a Karen who thought rules were optional and signatures were decorative. And it was time to bring the whole thing down. Cheryl didn't take the stop work order well. The next morning, she was pacing her front lawn in her usual tennis skirt, talking on the phone so loudly half the street could hear. She kept saying words like harassment and discrimination and completely authorized, like they were magical incantations that would make the zoning inspector disappear. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The inspector came back, this time with a county code enforcement officer. They took pictures, measured boundaries, and stapled a second violation notice right next to the first one. Cheryl tried to rip it down and shouted something about calling the mayor. The officer calmly reminded her that forging zoning documents was a felony, not a misunderstanding. Cheryl went back inside and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the window shutters. Of course, she didn't stop there. Oh no. Karen energy doesn't retreat, it escalates. That same afternoon, I got a fine from the HOA. Hand-delivered. For what, you ask? Unauthorized shade vegetation and lawn decor in violation of visual harmony standards. Translation: I had a potted ficus and a wind spinner shaped like a cat. Cheryl claimed they disrupted the aesthetic balance of the block. Meanwhile, she had scaffolding, a half-dug swimming pool, and power tools on a property that wasn't hers. I took the fine, smiled, and thanked her for the notice. That night, I forwarded it, along with copies of her fake documents and the recent violations, to every single member of the HOA board. But I didn't stop there. I also sent it to a reporter from the local newspaper who once interviewed me about a zoning case involving a petting zoo in a residential neighborhood. Turns out, illegal HOA construction projects led by fraud-happy suburban dictators made for excellent headlines. The article ran 2 days later. Front page of the Community and County section. The title? Local HOA President Under Investigation for Fraudulent Rezoning and Unauthorized Construction. The picture was of Cheryl, mid-yell, in her driveway, waving a file folder at a city inspector like she was swatting at bees. It was beautiful. The fallout came fast. 2 board members resigned. One neighbor printed out the article and taped it to his mailbox with a speech bubble added. Ask me about my illegal pool house. Another installed plastic pink flamingos around Cheryl's property line with little signs that read, "Not your lawn." But the best part? Cheryl called an emergency HOA meeting to do damage control. And I showed up. I don't usually attend HOA meetings. I find that arguing with people about mulch regulations and trash bin timing is a slow descent into madness. But this time, I made an exception. I arrived early, grabbed a folding chair, and sat right in the front row with a folder labeled Exhibits AZ. Cheryl walked in 10 minutes late, clearly flustered, holding a stack of handwritten notes and blinking like she hadn't slept in 3 days. She started the meeting with a monologue. There's been a lot of misinformation going around, she said, voice trembling just enough to make it sound rehearsed. I want to clarify that the recent zoning confusion is just that, confusion. The project in question is a community amenity, fully intended to benefit everyone here. I raised my hand. She ignored me. I've dedicated years of service to this neighborhood, she continued, and while there may have been minor clerical errors, everything I've done was for the improvement of our community. I raised my hand again. This time I waved a paper. She sighed. Fine. You have something to say. I stood up, walked to the front, and calmly laid out a map on the table in front of her. This is the property line, legally recorded with the county. Here's where the foundation of your pool house extends 15 feet onto my land. These are the fake documents submitted under my name. This is the forged signature in Comic Sans. And this, I said, pulling out the latest letter from the county, is the formal cease and desist order with your name on it. Dead silence. Then one of the board members cleared her throat and asked, "Wait, are you saying she forged your signature on a zoning request?" I nodded. "And you're, who exactly?" I turned to the room. "Zoning commissioner. For the county. Every permit goes through my office, including the ones she never filed." You could hear a pin drop. Cheryl looked like she'd been slapped with a brick made of legal jargon. She tried to stammer out a rebuttal, something about miscommunication and not realizing the boundaries had changed. But no one was buying it anymore. The board voted to suspend her as HOA president that night. It wasn't even close. One of them asked if they could also fine her for the sewage smell coming from her garden. Another wanted to know if she could be removed permanently. I smiled politely and told them that once the county investigation concluded, they might not have to worry about her voting on anything ever again. But Cheryl wasn't done fighting. The next morning, I received a letter. Handwritten. On glitter stationery, of all things. It was a cease and desist from Cheryl herself, threatening to sue me for defamation, emotional distress, and interference with community development. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. I filed it right into the trash and immediately forwarded a copy to my lawyer. And, because I like finishing what I start, I also forwarded all her zoning documents, her plumbing schematics, and a copy of the well tap photos to the county prosecutor. Forging a zoning signature is one thing. Illegally connecting to a private well is a whole other level of stupid. And the law agreed. 1 week later, she was served official notice of investigation. The contractors she'd hired began demanding back pay and threatening small claims court. Her bank account got flagged for suspicious HOA-related transfers. She tried to rally support, tried to paint herself as a victim of bureaucracy, but no one was listening anymore. The flamingos doubled. Someone put a disco ball on her front lawn with a sign that said, "Party's over." And then came the zoning hearing. I walked in wearing a suit. Cheryl showed up in what looked like a cocktail dress and a cardigan that had definitely seen better days. Her lawyer was some third-rate estate planner she'd probably found on a coupon site. Mine was a specialist in land use and municipal law who once dismantled an illegal golf course built over a wetland preserve. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Cheryl tried everything. Claimed she had verbal approvals. Blamed her contractor. Blamed the board. Blamed a clerical assistant in my office, who doesn't exist. I laid out everything document by document. The forged permit. The fake zoning request. The illegal construction. The well tap. The environmental violations from her dumping concrete runoff into the storm drain. The commissioners weren't just unimpressed. They were furious. The head of the panel said it was one of the most blatant cases of suburban fraud he'd ever seen. Cheryl turned red, then white, then some color I'm pretty sure isn't medically recommended. The final verdict? All construction to be demolished within 30 days. Fines totaling $38,000. Referral to the district attorney's office for criminal charges. And, because the universe has a beautiful sense of humor, an order to restore my property to its previous state, including compensation for my destroyed vegetable garden. As we walked out, Cheryl turned to me and muttered something about how I'd ruined everything. I smiled and replied, "You did that all by yourself. I just handed you the shovel." After the hearing, Cheryl disappeared for a few days. Her car was still in the driveway, but the curtains were drawn and the porch light stayed off. The silence was almost eerie. For someone who had treated the neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom, her sudden retreat felt like the collapse of a petty little empire. But trust me, no one was mourning. In fact, the atmosphere around the cul-de-sac shifted almost overnight. People actually smiled again. Lawn chairs started popping up on driveways. Kids rode bikes without being scolded for unsafe wheel behavior. And someone, I won't say who, replaced the HOA bulletin board notice with a hand-drawn picture of a pool house sinking into quicksand. It wasn't just symbolic. The actual demolition began 2 weeks later, right on schedule. Big machines rolled onto Cheryl's lawn at 9 a.m. sharp. The workers looked more than a little pleased to be tearing down what they called the Palace of Doom. The half-finished structure went fast. The wet bar was the first to go, followed by the pool foundation. Turns out, she'd poured it too close to the gas line anyway. One wrong dig and she could have lit up the neighborhood like a 4th of July barbecue. The pizza oven collapsed with a satisfying crunch, and by the time the sun set, the backyard was reduced to rubble and broken dreams. Cheryl watched it all from behind her living room blinds. Occasionally, you'd catch a glimpse of her eyes peeking through the curtain folds, and I swear she looked like a raccoon caught raiding the trash, guilty, twitchy, and vaguely aggressive. I suppose I could have felt bad for her. But then I remembered the forged permits, the sewage in my garden, and the casual way she'd bulldozed my property like she was entitled to it. Regret requires empathy. Cheryl ran out of that a long time ago. With her pool house fantasy officially erased from existence, Cheryl tried to pivot. She began circulating a new petition to reinstate herself as HOA president. Claimed the whole investigation was a conspiracy. Blamed me, the county, the media, the contractors, and even her own board. Jealousy, she called it. I was trying to beautify our neighborhood, and they couldn't stand it. Only 3 people signed her husband and a neighbor who later claimed he thought it was a pizza order form. The rest of the neighborhood wasn't just done with her. They were organizing against her. Several homeowners started a movement to dissolve the HOA altogether. They collected signatures, held town hall-style meetings in driveways, and passed around flyers with slogans like, "No more mini-dictators," and "Our yards, our rules." Someone started selling t-shirts that read Community Oasis Survivor. They sold out in 2 days. Meanwhile, I had my own plans. The county awarded me compensation not just for the damages to my property but also for the fraudulent use of my name and position. Between that payout and the settlement Cheryl had to cough up to avoid a civil lawsuit, I had a tidy little sum to work with. So I decided to do a bit of beautification myself. Legally, of course. I brought in landscapers to restore my garden, built a greenhouse, and even installed a koi pond right where her illegal pool deck used to sit. The irony was delicious. Cheryl built a pool to show off. I built a peaceful oasis to enjoy. One was made of ego, the other out of spite and vegetables. Neighbors started stopping by to chat, offer compliments, and occasionally bring baked goods. "It's like the neighborhood's healing," one woman said as she handed me a pie. I nodded. Yeah. Funny what happens when the HOA stops fining people for wind chimes. As for Cheryl, her fate only spiraled further. The county pressed charges for document forgery and illegal construction. She tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the judge wasn't having it. She was fined again and sentenced to community service. Her punishment? Cleaning public parks. Every Saturday. Wearing a neon vest. The very first weekend, she ran into 2 neighbors and pretended not to see them. They took pictures anyway and posted them in the group chat under the caption, "Karen cleans the community." And because karma apparently has a flair for timing, Demolition Day had fallen on her birthday. Her 50-something elegance brunch turned into a backyard of rubble and orange fencing. No guests showed up. No cake. Just the sound of jackhammers and a concrete mixer backing up. But the real cherry on top came from the HOA board itself. What remained of it, anyway? After removing Cheryl, they voted to completely overhaul the HOA bylaws. They added clauses to prevent unilateral decision-making, required community-wide votes for large projects, and banned any fines related to aesthetics unless a 2/3 majority approved. Then, in a unanimous decision, they renamed the annual summer block party. From then on, it would be known as Freedom Fest. And the theme? No more Karens. The party was held on my lawn. We had inflatable pools, lawn games, barbecue, and someone even set up a karaoke machine. Kids ran wild with popsicles, parents lounged in chairs, and at one point, someone brought out a Karen piñata. It had a little straw hat and sunglasses. Everyone took a swing. Even the mailman. I stood by the grill, flipping burgers, watching it all unfold, and felt something I hadn't felt since moving into the neighborhood: peace. Not just the absence of noise or conflict, but actual, communal peace. The kind where people weren't afraid to hang fairy lights or plant tulips without a memo. Where neighbors talked to each other instead of filing anonymous complaints. Cheryl had ruled through fear. And when she fell, she left a vacuum we happily filled with laughter, music, and tiki torches. She still lives down the street. Still peeks through her curtains. But these days, she doesn't say much. No more clipboard strolls. No more nasty note. No more HOA tantrums. She walks her dog at odd hours and avoids eye contact. Some say she's planning a comeback. Others say she's finally realized she was never the queen, just a petty tyrant in a too small kingdom. And me? I go about my life, watering my tomatoes, tending to my koi, occasionally checking the mailbox for passive-aggressive letters that never arrive. Every so often, I glance at the empty lot where the pool house once stood and think about how fast people can fall when they build on stolen ground. She built her dream on lies, forged papers, and someone else's land. I built mine on quiet patience, petty revenge, and a perfectly legal demolition order. One crumbled. The other thrives. Funny how that works.